Business owners, public servants, impact minded, humble leaders, and fellow corporate hippies. Do you want to make a bigger impact in your world? But it's just hard. It's just freaking hard. And it's exhausting, and sometimes it can be soul destroying. And yet, the work, the message, what you're about, it's important. Well, inside my Impact Club, thoughtful business owners, community, and humble leaders are supported to make their dent, your dent, in the universe in your way. Now, this is not a course. This is a high touch community with 2 live calls every month, plus a whole raft of other benefits that I've said before, it's a little bit like what the Impact Club is to your mental, social, and emotional well-being as a leader. It's the same as what good food, sleep, and the gym or exercise is to your physical well-being. So if that sounds like you, then head along to impactfulpresenters.com and click on the For Individuals menu and you'll see the Impact Club right there. Or of course, the direct link is in the show notes. But now, hello. Welcome to another episode of Speaking with Confidence with Kat Matson, the show where I teach you, humble leaders, impact-minded leaders, how to show up, speak up, and be heard so you can make your desired dent in the universe. It's fabulous to have you here. And if this is your first episode, welcome. Welcome to the, the gorgeousness that is this community. And if you are a regular listener, welcome back. It's lovely to have you here again. Today, I'm talking about how personal is too personal, particularly in the context of creating engaging speeches. Now, this came from a question that was asked in one of the online communities that I'm a member of. I said, if you had a speaking coach in your pocket, which you do, it's me, what would you ask? What do you want to know? And I'll answer it on an upcoming podcast. And this particular question came in and it says, how to make your speech engaging? How much do you share of yourself? Now, in particular, Chantel goes on to explain that her speeches are about trauma and grief and how to bring the unspoken into the conversation, but also how it affected her and maybe affects her audiences when it comes to running their business. So there's some deep stuff in here. So it's a beautiful question. So what I want to talk about today is, stories of lived experience is easily the best way that you can make your speeches engaging. Now, these stories can be yours. They can be your lived experience stories, or they can be the stories of your clients or the people who have inspired the work that you do. How much you share of yourself, that question can often come from a place of doubt. It comes from a place of, but do people really want to hear my story? Do people, why is my story relevant? Well, your story is relevant because you bring insight, you bring lived experience, you bring a perspective that your people want to hear. So my first answer to the question of how personal is too personal, it's not too personal, so long as the context is correct. The other thing when it comes to telling stories about yourself is if your audience can see themselves in your story, then it can be really, really powerful. People want to relate, particularly when it comes to things like trauma and grief or challenging situations. People want to see themselves in your story so they can develop their own tools, their own strategies for managing their particular situation. There is a balance, though. There is a balance between, I'm going to say, gratuitously oversharing your story for the self-indulgent element and for your own processing, for your own psychological healing versus being valuable to your audience. So I'm sure plenty of us have seen those speakers who, hmm, it feels like they're oversharing and that they're processing their entire stuff on stage. And if they haven't worked to craft a presentation that connects their story to their audience, that can feel really self-indulgent and it can miss the mark. So the balance is in, why am I telling this story? What is the benefit to my audience? What is the benefit to the listener? There's also a balance, particularly when it comes to talking about things like trauma and grief. There is a balance between telling the story of the trauma, telling the story of the grief, and going into that heavy place, and then bringing your audience out of it so they feel like they can do something. There's two kind of examples here that I want to use to illustrate. I distinctly remember years and years and years, in fact, it must be 18 years ago now, because I was newly pregnant and I was attending a fundraiser for Red Nose Day, for sudden infant death syndrome. And the stories were very powerful. They were told by mothers who had lost children. But they left us. They left us in that place of despair and in grief. They didn't bring us back out to a place of hope or optimism or being able to take action. And the vibe in the room at the end of that lunch was so despondent and so sad and so helpless. They didn't raise the money that they were wanting to because people were just bereft. And sympathy is not necessarily, or despondency is not necessarily the best strategy for inspiring people to take action. Contrast that, if you will, and maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't. There's a beautiful storyline in one of the later seasons of Sex and the City where Samantha is speaking at a breast cancer fundraising event. Now, Samantha is invited to speak at this event because she has, by this stage, survived breast cancer. And she's prepared and she's put on this very officious, front for the event. She's wearing a wig. She's not presenting herself. And halfway through her speech, which is being delivered very stiltingly and robotically because she thinks that's what she needs to do, she's melting under the spotlights. And so she takes off her wig and all of a sudden just becomes Samantha again. And all of these other women in the audience stand up and take off their wigs too, because she gives them permission to show up as themselves. She gives them permission to show up in their moments of vulnerability, of healing, of treatment, of grief. Now, that's an example. Well, it's a TV show. Um, But my point here is, whilst that's an example of a beautifully crafted, inspirational story from grief, my point here is, when using your personal stories of grief and of trauma, of tragedy, it's not necessarily about doing the tragedy to triumph story. You do need to be really clear, though, where you want to leave your audience at the end. And if you leave them a mess on the floor, if you leave them feeling completely despondent and helpless, that's probably not the space that you want to leave them in. You probably want to leave them in a different state. You probably want to leave them in a state of hope or optimism or possibility or whatever it is. So my answer to the question of how do you create an engaging speech and how personal is too personal? Well, use your lived experience stories to be engaging. Take people on that emotional journey. Use your I statements. Tell your story in the first person with the right balance of detail and emotion, and then making sure that you bring people back out, making sure that you leave people, I'm not going to say on a high because that's incredibly disrespectful, but you leave people feeling up. Don't leave people feeling down. I will pop a link in the show notes too, because I'm reminded of an episode where that I'm quite sure I've done it, about avoiding misery porn. And what I mean by that is we in a world that does seem to, I don't know, click through on the misery stories. I think it's a fine line that you want to balance. If you're sharing stories of grief and trauma in order to equip people to get through it, that's not misery porn. That's empowerment. That's education. And you really want to stay in that space. So, as I say, I feel like I say it every episode, maybe not every episode, but when it comes to drafting or creating an engaging speech, and when it comes to judging how personal is too personal, begin with your audience, begin with the end in mind. Where do you want your audience to be at the end? What state do you want them to be in? What action do you want them to take? What is the purpose of this presentation, and where do you want to leave your audience at the end of this presentation? That informs then how you tell your story, the story arc that you're taking people on, and the action that you want them to take at the end. And it's very hard for people to take action when they are despondent and helpless versus when they feel inspired and empowered. It's such a juicy question, and I really appreciate it. If you want some more information on how to showcase your talents in telling these kind of personal stories as well, check out episode 140. I will post the link to the misery porn. I really hope that's a episode that I've recorded and I haven't just made it up. So that will be in the show notes as well. A reminder too about the Impact Club that I mentioned at the top of this episode. If you would like a community, a group of cheerleaders, coaches, well, I'm the coach, a space where you are supported to make the impact that you are striving to make in your world, then come and check us out. You can join for just a month, and if it's not your cup of tea, that's totally fine. It's not a course. It's a legitimate community. We meet twice a month in an online group call, and there's a whole host of other benefits as well that come with it. So click the link below or visit impactfulpresenters.com and click on the For Individuals menu tab. With all of that said, thank you again for joining me for another episode. It's always a joy to have you. Next week, next episode, I'm talking about possibly one of the biggest challenges that people come up with when it comes to speaking with confidence, the ums and the ahs and the filler words, and how to stop using them, how to stop using those ums and ahs. Until then, here's to confidence and here's to impact. And I look forward to seeing you really soon.